Yes, guys, welcome back to SFeatleyTV. How are you all doing? We're back for another week of the DNF with DNF1 for the Chequered flag show. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, not too bad, Stephen. Hope everyone is okay on this Friday afternoon. And yeah, thank God. Looking forward to the weekend.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the fact that we've got football safe for another year, for now. Obviously, we all know what's going on down in the Emirates right now. But yeah, give me a quick thoughts, football wise. What you
wow
made of this week?
Well, as an Arsenal fan like yourself, not our club's not exactly been managed in the best light. Certainly against the values that most of us as fans treasure and hold dear. I certainly do, and it seems that change of some form is needed in terms of the ownership, in terms of the structure. So hopefully these protests that are going on as we speak right now won't be in vain, and that at the very least those that are responsible for running this club start to realise that the fans in general, as well as the overall game of football, can't be monopolised or sold out into, for better way of putting it. I'm so glad that this ESL, for however we know it, isn't going to be happening. And hopefully, from what we've seen this week, the fan and people power will always win. So hopefully that continues.
Yeah, for me, I think it's quite clear we need to save football from these people, quite literally, because I think sooner or later they'll try it again, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, well, I was expecting someone to be there at it today, so we could do maybe a reaction or a live stream there at 7 o'clock, 7:10, but not the case. So we're going to do a reaction to the protest. Obviously, there's a few thousand there at the stadium. So, but yeah, we're moving. As I said, this is F1 we're talking about here, and we're here for the new 2022 regulations for Formula One. And yeah, massive changes since the biggest changes since the turbo hybrid era, even changes to the power unit itself, improving structure, improving safety, improving all types of areas of the car. I think they are going to be slower in 2022, but then the whole point is that usually when they are slower, there'll always be teams finding ways to make it faster. So yeah, give us your initial feelings towards the new regulations.
Well, it's like you said, Stephen, the rule changes that are going to be happening for 2022, as far as the technical regulations are concerned, it's probably the largest cohort of changes that we've seen since 2009, when back then, of course, the cars very similar looking to a degree to where they are now, where they're quite radical in their design. There's a lot of fins, a lot of flaps, and a lot of aero pieces on the car. Very extreme looking.
You mean not 2014?
No, 2009. Because obviously back then, before that, as I said, there was so much radical change. I mean, we had the changes in 2014 for turbo hybrid era, and of course, those changes were designed to make the cars faster. And ultimately, they achieved that, but it didn't guarantee better racing. And unfortunately, what we got was plenty and plenty of races. Okay, Mercedes have been very dominant in that period, but we ended up getting an era where qualifying became, in most cases, the critical factor rather than the racing itself. Back in 2009, they tried to do the same thing, obviously flip it the other way around so that racing would be much easier to do. It'd be easier to follow cars. It'd be easier to overtake. And for a while, we were relatively successful. The issue at hand this time around is obviously we're back to a point where we need to make the racing more exciting. We need to make the racing more diverse, but we also need to try and close that gulf in performance that, of course, that Mercedes and Red Bull and up until the last year or two, Ferrari had created. And that's why these rules, there's been so much work that's gone into this project for so many years now. Ross Brawn leading the way. Patrick Head has been very much involved in this for years, former Williams head, and several other figures that have come up with this manifesto, if you like, of rule changes, technical changes that the teams are not only going to have to get on top of, but it has the potential to completely randomize the field to a degree where a team like Haas at the moment, which you'd argue would have the slowest car in the field, could very much turn up to Melbourne this time next season with the best car and with an equal budget cap as well, not to forget. So hopefully it delivers what we want as fans, and that this is the rule change, not to end all rule changes, but this is the huge rule changes that we need to make Formula One a competitive sport from the front to the very back.
Yeah, that's the main thing, is that we want to see closer racing. We want to see everyone getting an equal opportunity in such a way. Is that, and this is why probably at the minute I prefer, say, like I don't like people comparing the FIA to sort of like UEFA and that. Is that, I mean, like you saw with the Super League, how like they want to make it that themselves and everything like that, where with the FIA, it's about trying to make it more fair and equal for teams to win a Grand Prix, to get pole position and radicalize it so everyone gets a fair chance. And I think with these new regulations does that, as well as also looking at safety aspect. So I think the main thing they picked up on is that, and this is one of the regulations, and that you'll see quite different is, obviously you saw the wings and the flaps and the sort of like the end plates, and maybe like an end plate that Hamilton lost during the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. This is in terms of this regulation, like parts of it are made stronger, parts of it have been made sort of with a rubber membrane to try and make the cars so that there's no tiny bits of carbon fiber spread all over a circuit after an accident, that then someone like Bottas, who had it in Azerbaijan, caught a puncture through running over a piece of a car that was knocked off. So it stops the splitting, like it does it. Parts break, but they don't break into tiny little fragments that can easily hit a driver's head, like Massa in 09, or puncture a tire, which could end up causing someone to fly into a wall if you're driving at 200 miles an hour, to then puncture an immediate puncture. So yeah, for that sense, it's a lot like safer in a way. Plus, like they're going to make the noses longer to improve energy absorption, because if anyone that doesn't know, all the cars have like literally energy absorbing technology around the car to, in the case of an accident, they're now making it longer to try and sort of further protect the drivers in a head-on impact, which is probably like the worst sort of impact you can have. On the sides, it's going to be more strengthened structurally. I can't think now. Oh yeah, and plus, like say the cockpit as well. The problem that for George Russell got in the car, Lewis Hamilton's car, it was just really, really tight for him to fit in, because obviously everyone might not know is that the car is built around them to save weight. So they're now making the cockpits larger so that taller drivers like your George Russell, I think Paul Di Resta was a really tall driver, Jenson Button was a really tall driver, they could fit into a car more easily. So yeah, so it's more suitable for taller drivers to be able to get into the sport as well. So, but yeah, it springs a lot of uncertainty for the future, and that's probably why Haas would say maybe have scratched this season. You'll see a lot of teams this season, they'll scratch this season and they'll look towards the next season's regulations. And yeah, so I mean, obviously it's a radical change, as you said. What would you say would be sort of say there's the best change that you've seen from these regulations?
Well, I think the biggest change that we're going to have to look forward to for next season will be the return of ground effect. Now, ground effect, for those of you that probably won't remember ground effect, it's older than you and I, Stephen. So I wouldn't blame people for not remembering ground effect. But ground effect
was back in Lotus when they had Colin Chapman and Andretti.
Exactly. What Colin Chapman, one of the greatest designers of a Formula One car of all time.
He was mad, though, I have to admit.
Of course, but then
he was mad, making cars lighter so they break and then make it lighter still.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's the mark of a great designer or a great technical engineer like Adrian Newey. You will literally push the boundaries as far as you can go and maybe push them further. But with the return to ground effect, this has been out of the sport since 1982. So we're talking back in the days where Keke Rosberg, Niki Lauda, Alain Prost was first getting into Formula One, that kind of era. And the whole point of ground effect is to kind of counter or negate the loss of downforce that we're going to see from these simplified aero pieces, adjustments to the bodywork, whereas a lot of it's going to be recovered on the wheels from the side pods perspective. The ground effect, it's not going to appear the same way as the old ground effect cars do. So the old Lotuses back in the 80s that used to have the side skirts, that's not going to be a thing next year. You're not going to see these Formula One cars have side skirts on them. You're going to see a lot of fins underneath the floor, which is going to direct the airflow underneath to create that extra suction, which should allow the cars to still corner at relatively high speeds as they do now, but to a much safer degree as it did back in the 80s, because it was so inconsistent. It could be quite dangerous at times when the drivers went. I mean, these were the best drivers in the world, but if there's a threat to their safety by this ground effect technology, the FIA have stepped in now to allow it to come back into the sport, but control it to a degree where it should not only be safe, but also very, very effective. And of course, the main motivation to bring in ground effect is to allow the cars to continue to receive high levels of downforce, but not necessarily be affected by the turbulent air from the car in front. And I think the biggest motivator for these regulation changes, as well as equally in the playing field to a degree, is allowing cars to follow each other relatively close without fear of losing 50% of the downforce that they currently have, so that the front end just doesn't turn in and they need DRS and needs to be a second or so faster than the car in front. I mean, Charles Leclerc at the Imola Grand Prix, for love nor money, could not overtake Lando Norris, even though it was clear that he was much faster than Lando towards the end, purely because that Ferrari engine wasn't powerful enough. Lewis Hamilton gets behind Lando in an equal engine. He's able to eventually breeze past him with DRS. What the FIA want and what the stewards want is for F1 to get to a point where we can rid ourselves of DRS, because DRS it's like it's basically an assist. Yeah, well, not necessarily a cheat button, but it's basically an assist. You're overtaking with an extra performance. And I think F1 fans want F1 to go back to the days where you didn't need DRS or you didn't need KERS or anything like that, and no aids to overtake someone. And we don't want it necessarily to be a sport where DRS is like a slam dunk, like you just can't defend, because not all great races are one where there's like thousands of overtakes. You can have one with very little overtakes, like Rosberg versus Hamilton in the duel in the desert, Bahrain 2014, where those two, they swapped positions a few times, but it was more about the defensive driving than it was for the overtake. So that's ultimately what F1 want next season to be about, and ground effect is going to play a huge part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so obviously I'm going to just share the screen here. So we're just going to get the screen up. Guys, give me 2 seconds. Please do hit the like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button. You also find the links to DNF1 Podcast in the description below. Go and subscribe to them now. So that's basically what the cars are going to end up looking like, for an example. So yeah, so obviously with the 18 is 8, everyone is obviously raving about the 18-inch wheels. I don't know why I've got the Conky L banner there. There you go. There you go. We're all Arsenal fans anyway. So Yeah, but obviously, like they've got the 18-inch rim tires there. I mean, do you think that's going to be a benefit or a real hindrance to the teams with these in-season rims? Because we've seen already Hamilton try out these 18-inch rims after the Imola Grand Prix. So I wanted to know your opinion on the 18s. Is that something you'd go for?
Well, they look really cool. I mean, F1 has been kind of outdated with the tire specs, if you like, for some time. They're running very low profile tires for a while now. They've always been running these 16-inch ones. The 18-inch quite similar to what we see in F2. And I've seen the photos. I've seen Lewis obviously testing in the Merc at Imola. I also saw in Bahrain, Ferrari had a go, Red Bull had a go. They look really, really cool. I'm surprised it's taken F1 as long as it has. Of course, it presents challenges where the drivers will have to be able to try and find better ways to see over it. But that's not really too much of a concern because they don't see their front wing during the races. Yeah. So I don't see why the tyres, unless it really obstructs their vision, why it'd be a problem. That's why we're going through this testing now. But from what I've seen so far, they look really, really cool. And I think they suit the cars very, very nicely. Let's not forget, we're going to get the wheel bodywork next season, where similar to what we had in 2009, we're going to have the hubcaps and the wheel blockers that are going to help direct that airflow better, like we saw in 2009 on the rims. So we're not going to have the see-through rims that we had before. As I said, we're going to have the blockers, and there'll be some interesting designs. The teams will go full paint-wise, and they'll look pretty cool. I mean, the cars themselves are going to look very, very futuristic looking, like quite radical to a degree, but at the same time, simplistically elegant. They look fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing these cars. And as you can see from the images there, the wheels, they definitely suit the piece. I think the 16-inch wheels, if they were used next season, would not suit the bodywork or the shape of the car at all.
Wow, they're also thinking about 25 races for this next season. Pre-race press conferences switched to a Thursday to Friday. First, second practice sessions, while cars were now ahead of first and second practice sessions, while cars will now be in part firming conditions from the start of FP3 instead of qualifying. FP3 also marks a point at which teams must return their cars to the reference specification presented for scrutineering before FP1, so any bodywork trialed in practice must be removed. So obviously we know about the less wind tunnel testing, which basically you get more of if you finish further down the grid. Another thing is but fewer upgrades, more standard parts, and limits on components. So in addition to new rules, there are some big changes in terms of technical and sporting regulations. Rules have been put in place to limit upgrades over race weekends and the number of in-season aero upgrades, reducing the costly development arms race that can result in a less competitive grid. Because in the end, it's all trying to make it self-sufficient. It's not. This is all about making the teams more self-sufficient, basically saving them from themselves. So because it was getting ridiculous, the amount of money that was being spent. There was also introduction into certain parts, standardized parts such as fuel pumps, parts that must have a prescribed design, such as wheel covers, and increased restrictions on the number of times some components like brake pads can be replaced. Power units remain the same as now, but exhaust systems have been added to the list of PU components that are limited in a number of seasons, which each driver able to use 6 before a penalty. So wow, that's a new addition. So the power units stay the same because there were calls about they were taking about one of the main components of the power unit. Was it the MGUH?
Yeah. MGUH. So yeah, I mean that was talked about for some time, but I think we had the threat of obviously Honda were leaving, there's complications, not necessarily associated to the rule changes, but more for environmental reasons. Red Bull wanted an engine freeze for some time, and they got their wish in the end. And whilst the engines themselves won't necessarily be changing in terms of the actual parts that are going to be involved, with the exception of less exhausts are going to be available. There's going to be an engine freeze from next season, and this is quite a critical one, and I think a lot of people have not realized this, but from next season we're going to have there's only going to be one opportunity for the teams to bring a brand new engine. So Ferrari, Mercedes, Honda, of course, will provide Red Bull with one more engine that they'll be able to work with themselves from a technical perspective. And of course, Renault, who are supplying Alpine. There's only going to be one opportunity, like there was this season, to make any changes that they feel. Then after that, it's going to be frozen for the next 3 seasons. So there won't be any changes until the 2025 season after that.
You've got to get it right.
Absolutely. And this does not cater for reliability issues or anything like that. If you've got it, you've got to deal with it. But we're at a point now where these engines are so reliable now compared to how they were back in 2014 when the first versions of them were coming out. Well, there's been so much development, so much research into these engines. They are as good as they come. And, you only
get 3 engines. I mean, most of apart from the energy store and the Collode Electronics, which had 2 parts, the rest of it's you only get 3 parts of them for a season.
Well, so absolutely, I mean, as recently as about 10-15 years ago, Stephen, you'd almost go through an engine race, maybe 2. That's just how
unreliable one each session or replace one in qualifying.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Gearboxes as well be the same thing, but no, they've come leaps and bounds on this. The only team I suppose that could be worried about or could be affected by the new regulations as far as the engines go could be Ferrari, because Ferrari have earmarked a project and they've been working on for a year or so, this brand new revolutionized engine. They're going to change the structure of it to be quite similar to what Mercedes have done with the V-cycle on it, with the twin turbo underneath it. That Ferrari were rumored to do this season. They decided not to. And Ferrari are very, very confident that if they get this right, it could very much be a game changer, i.e. could take them to the very top of the power unit hierarchy as they were in 2019. Only this time, for lack of evidence or investigation findings, that this engine will definitely be legal, according to Ferrari. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what they do, but it is very exciting because this season, whilst they have made improvements, which I believe has took them above Renault, they look like they're still straggling a little bit behind Honda and a little bit more behind Mercedes. So, and we saw that in Imola, case in point with Leclerc trying to overtake Lando Norris and then getting breezed past by Lewis Hamilton towards the end, Carlos Sainz as well. So it's going to be a big year for Ferrari. They'll have to get it right because when you make so many different changes to your engine structure, you create more and more risk that reliability issues can occur. Honda, of course, noted that this season already, and Red Bull at times have not been able to run that engine at full capacity. Hopefully over the course of the season that will improve, but that is due to the fact that they've had this massive overhaul of their engine to chase performance to such a degree. They fast-tracked the development by 2 years or so to the point where they can challenge Mercedes, but at the cost of reliability issues. So it's quite interesting. There's a lot of techie stuff to take in, but as you were talking about earlier, Stephen, the aim of the game with all these scrutineering changes is going to be a lot more stricter. The budget cap, the ATR regulations over CAD and wind tunnel development as well, depending on where you are in the Constructors' Championship. All of that comes into place is the main motivator is to keep the field as bunched up as they possibly can, prevent teams from being able to, build too much of a gulf to its competition, because of course everybody has the same budget. So you're not going to see a situation where Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, for example, that have double the budget of almost any other team, going to outspend them.
I think it's because that when they brought the rules out in 2014, they all thought, I think they're all sitting there thinking that, this is going to completely radicalize the field, and like people are going to be struggling left, right, and centre to be able to do this. And I think they were just caught so off guard by Mercedes with their. I mean, I remember about halfway, I think it was about the 6th race into the season that Sky Sports reported it, how they did it. It was basically like separating the turbo and just putting a shaft in the middle of it to basically give them hardly any turbo lag, right? Which then also made the car cooler. It made the gearbox go underneath it, made the car more balanced, so that it had also, it made it also draggy as well because the whole thing's compact. So whereas everyone else was a much wider body, so I think that just caught everyone off guard. Right? I mean, I think Bahrain Grand Prix, if we watched that during the desert, Hamilton and Rosberg were fighting each other to the point that they nearly stood still at a hairpin, and yet they were still going faster than everyone. I mean, after that safety car restart, they were 6 seconds up in 2 laps, though they were fighting each other into turn 1, which just shows the dominance they had. And then I think Christian Horner said it. They even had the more dominance than the dominant era of McLaren in the late 80s, early 90s, and the dominance of Schumacher. They have more over the field in that sense.
Well, I don't know about McLaren in 88 and 89. I think Christian Horner might want to...
I mean, 88 is
I mean, yeah, you're right. But
15
I mean...
out of 16 races, they were thinking that they were looking at the Mercedes and thinking, God, this is going to win every race here. How are we going to stop this lot?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But no, you're right. And as I said, the main motivation of this is to prevent any one team from being able to steal a march on everybody else. And of course, if there is room for innovation, I'm sure there is, they have been very, very stringent, but they don't want to end up with a situation where the rest of the field aren't able to catch up, because the last thing you want is another era where one team has managed to find the loophole of all loopholes in these regulations, as hard as that probably will be to do, because they've been really stringent on this to the point where they've tried to find their own loopholes in all this, to prevent the situation from a team doing that and end up dominating this area in the way that Mercedes have. Because as much as it's great to see these teams be so good, the last thing you want to see is an era of racing being dominated by one team and there's no fun and no competition in it. So I'm not quite sure where Stephen has gone, if he's having internet issues or anything else, but if anyone's got any questions, then please chuck them in to us. Anyone's got any comments about this, please chuck them in. And Stephen's back with us.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm bad. Please do smash the like button. Do make sure to keep yourself locked in here. We are providing the best show possible. And yeah, obviously, what we were saying about. So cars will also be 25 kilos heavier. Just get some notes I put down here. So yeah, they got the mass is the mass is more heavier this time, as well as as the result of the new tires, changes in the chassis and PU materials to save costs, further safety measures, and the introduction of standardized parts and prescription parts. That will make cars slower now to begin with. But like with all things, is that gearbox design will be more restricted, with configurations frozen to save research and development and costs. Tire blankets, meanwhile, will not be scrapped as once proposed. Instead, will remain for 2021 and 2022, albeit with the regulations. I feel that's probably because they've seen, like last season, you saw like Nürburgring, Turkey, those races were so cold that the teams were struggling to get any grip, get any heat in the tires. So they probably realized if we sent this lot out on bone cold tires, right, they'll just slide off the road. So I do feel is that they've done that. Just they've probably just realized and thought that's probably we don't need to really do that, to be honest. I don't see the problem with tire blankets. I mean, do you think that tire blankets should be scrapped?
It's a hard one because you gotta find that balance.
I think they're doing that for safety issues.
You got to find that balance between exciting racing and safety. I mean, if we look at F2, for example, where they don't use tire blankets for tires that go on the cars in the pit stops, the guys have to generate their own heat cycles to generate heat into the tires. You get that first few laps of the stint where they're so much slower than even guys that are on out on older tires, which completely changes the game in terms of whether to overcut or to undercut in terms of strategy. And that's always a good thing for the sport. It adds an extra variable, an extra element to create exciting moments in Grand Prix racing, which can, in this environment, determine who wins and loses. That's what it's there for. In F1's case, because there's so much downforce involved, I feel like there is a potential increased risk for accidents, for crashes. As you pointed out, at colder events last season, there were teams struggling. And if we're introducing ground effect, that is very much going to be relying on tyres that are going to be much more robust, but also be able to be straight out of the blankets into the cars, a decent temperature, and they just get on with it. So I wouldn't have said it was a bad decision to not have the tyre blankets. There's something they really did give a lot of thought, but I don't think it's something that you definitely going to be desperately needing if you're already creating a spectacle where the racing is going to be exciting. As I said, I'm really excited about these regulation changes. There's a lot there that I've seen that convinces me that not only have F1 got a potential cycle of regulations here, which could create some of the most competitive and brilliant racing we've ever seen in the sport's history, but also a situation where the teams incredibly, and we've talked about football already on this with the ESL, have incredibly voted against their own interests for the sake of the show, the sake of the spectacle, because they obviously acknowledge that without the fanfare, without the excitement, especially in the world where majority of countries, except for one or two, pay subscription as to watch Formula One racing, you need to keep those people on side. And if you're going to end up with another era of racing like we've had overall,
unlike in certain sports,
yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. So I think the team should be commended for this because, people can throw this, that, and everything else and say, "Oh, this team don't want this team don't want that. It only suits certain agendas." Look,
well,
Mercedes
we compared it because I'm sorry, because like we compared it to 2009. 2009, you remember how all those teams were like, "Nah, we don't want to do that no more. We want to do this, and if you don't like it, we're gonna make our own league." Even Ferrari were threatening that at one point, right? And we're threatening to break away. And it's like what you see with football, and it's kind of like what we saw then. And why I'm saying to people now is, yes, the FI are now working with the teams, all 10 teams, right? And some of them may say, "Oh yeah, but we want this, we want that." And Ferrari had their own to pay to be in the sport. And they were getting paid to be in the sport, and we were just like, and the fans would just, with the FI went, "Well, no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work like that anymore." And we're going to go. Fine then.
Yeah, I mean,
and in the end, Ferrari stayed because they probably knew in best interest of the fans. That's what they wanted, but that's the thing, is that they realized that the fan base make the sport. They pay for the sport. They make the sport, as well as all the sponsors. So if no one's gonna, but then it's like with the sponsors are going to sponsor them if no one's watching F1. No,
absolutely, yeah.
So that's why is that I feel is that, like, when they've listened to the fans, you can see in these regulations they have, because they're doing their best to actually try and make it. And that's what they've done each season. They've done, like 2019, they took away the end plates, the 2020, they've made some other changes to try and make it more competitive. 2021, and then 2021, they limited the amount of rear downforce on the car to try and make it more competitive. But they realized that in the end, it's the front wings and the rear wings that are causing the problem, because they don't get enough downforce behind someone behind them, being behind someone. So they've realized we now need to actually start looking at other ways, and another way is using ground effect to its advantage. And with ground effect, you could see probably in the end cars going as fast as what we see now with these regulations, but it will take time, obviously, because the amount of, so now they only get so many chances to improve the car. But you will see eventually, you will see them compete at a similar level, but they'll be able to closer together and fighting each other for position much easier. And then, like you said, you might not need DRS. You might not need that. You might not need the overtake button because you won't need to be relying so much on that to be able to catch up to the guy in front because you're suffering because of downforce.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example. Obviously, with the rear wings are going to be raised up. That's one of the biggest factors in these rule changes, the rear wings, because it's going to direct all of the dirty air up and above the car behind. And this is kind of where the motivation is, because, you know, the modern day cars claim to a degree that they could be 3 or 4 seconds behind the car in front, maybe 5 seconds at certain circuits. And you do feel the effects of that dirty air, which of course restricts your front end downforce. It upsets the air balance of your car, and it makes your cost so much lower.
Just gonna say, for people that don't know, for dirty air, basically what we mean is when the car comes, when the effect of dirty air is basically someone punching a hole in someone in front punching a hole through the air, and basically what comes off the car is one, really warm air, which don't make any sort of difference, and really just heats your car up, and which is why then you'll see people pulling out to get fresh air to be able to cool the car down. 2 is that air is not really hitting the front because it's created a hole. It's created a hole in the air. So basically, you're not getting the air you need to push on the front wing to push the car on the floor. You're not getting the air on the rear wing to push the car to the floor. So basically, you're then losing out in terms of aerodynamic efficiency. So when you turn in, you'll start getting understeer because you can't turn in because there's no downforce. So that's what we really mean by dirty air.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. But yeah, it's going to be moving that air, channeling it above the cars behind, so that they claim that despite losing about 50% worth of downforce in the current era, this one, they reckon it's going to be around 10%. And the tests that they've run, the CFD work that they've done, does seem to suggest that that's going to be good. So this is a really exciting change that I think a lot of us are going to look forward to. Hopefully it creates the desired result. But as we've said already, this is very much a set of regulations that has been voted in and approved for the benefit of the overall sport. And, you know, you mentioned Ferrari in particular. Of course, Ferraris do have that power of veto. So, of course, any rule changes that come into effect, if Ferrari say they're not happy, then it doesn't happen, which I know a lot of fans will say they're not happy about. But Ferrari, as I said, they have that power, but they've chosen not to use it. They are aware, as everyone else, that the rules and regulation changes were needed, and it's going to be a benefit of the sport, which, of course, as a global brand like Ferrari are, you need that exposure. You need that fanfare. And, of course, if they're winning a championship where no one is interested or watching in, then nobody wins.
Just hoping that the new regulations curb any dominance from any team, like it's with Mercedes, also maybe with Red Bull as well, back in the blown diffuser as well. It's funny that you can realistically complain about a team being good. You complain about everyone else not being good enough, or complain the FIA or for not stop. I don't complain that a team is good because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's sort of blaming maybe the competition because they can't build, like, for say like Red Bull, for example, they should be competing with Mercedes and they should not be building a car that's always 3/10 slower, for example. Other teams you can make excuses for because they don't have the money, they haven't got the money also to catch up compared to Mercedes. So and then others, it's like the FIA don't strict down on rules, but this is going to throw it up, a complete game changer. But I mean, like we said about the dirty air, numbers look good so far. I'm just going to highlight it here, right? It says here, right? And F1 and the FIA have noticed that when one car length behind another competitor, the following car now has around, right? With these new rules, it can, so that means DRS will be revisited because of this. It has around 86% of its usual downforce compared to the 55% it currently experiences. To help limit the RD costs, gearboxes will be frozen from 2022 to 2025. So not just the engine itself, the gearboxes as well. Like suspension regulations now only permit springs and dampers, meaning that usually solely torsion bars will not be allowed. The heave springs or inerters will also be banned to simplify the suspension systems. Suspension must now be solely included within the wheel assembly, meaning no external mounting must be permitted. Oh, great. I was really enjoying having those, like being able to adjust the car myself on the game. This is going to be really far up, but I might as well enjoy the next game while it lasts. Right. So in reality, the turbo hybrid formula wasn't going to change much for 2022. And although there was discussions to remove the MGUH, it was decided that they remain on the car. But to reduce cost, the power units were allowed to be a bit heavier and now must be made commercially available materials, and no exotic or exclusive materials are allowed. Commercially availability also extends to battery and turbo suppliers, where no exclusivity to deals are allowed. Customers must now have the option of equal spec equipment, includes software and fuels, which is pretty much what they're doing already. But teams may opt out of this if they have a commercially agreements or preferences in place, but manufacturers must at least offer up their engine maps and fuels. Fuel pumps will also be standardized, meaning that any fuel trickery cannot be monitored, can now be monitored more easily. That also includes any ancillary components such as pipes. Fuel for 2022 must include 10% sustainably sourced ethanol and up to 5.75%, and is set to be raised in the future. So it's kind of what we know already. We know that these teams are going to get the teams that are buyers, customers, are going to be able to have the same maps. We knew that already from, I think, from these regulations we've got now. They have the same what they get with what the actual manufacturers get, which is great. This is what we want to see, and it should be fair like that. But it also is great is that we won't see that sort of trickery that I think Ferrari had that trickery with their engine from 2018, from when they were dominating that last half of 2018 all the way to 2019 when they finally investigated. That's when I believe they really stole the march and had that advantage. It was more so in 2019, but 2018 that was where is that there was for me. It was a bit weird because that became less of an issue back once the cars were extended in 2017. Basically, the cars grew up. They became adults from the childlike sort of look. Because I mean, you look at F2, and even F2 didn't look that small compared to what the F1 cars looked in 2014. And I think a number of drivers were complaining like it was just getting too easy to drive these cars. It was just getting too safe, too easy. So, yeah, so it became less of an issue because you had more downforce and more like ability to go around corners faster. But back in 2014, obviously a power unit was a major big play because of the restriction on downforce. But yeah, I mean, it's good that we see customers getting the same equipment and getting the same maps and everything else to make it fairer.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to see any situations where Mercedes are going to be using party mode, if you like, in qualifying, and then one of their customer teams aren't going to get the same luxury. I mean, in general, we do already have that to a degree. And
because they tried to stop it during this season,
yes,
didn't they?
That's right. Yeah,
I do remember Christian Horner kept groaning about it, and I'm like, well, if when I don't, or whatever it was at the time, don't provide you a party mode, how's that Mercedes' fault? It's called innovation, mate. Right?
No, of
we
course,
were all moaning when you got that blown diffuser, but you still used it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the nature of Formula One. I mean,
Yeah.
there have been so many different
The idea
innovations.
is then you've got to come
Yeah.
up with your own. It's like with the DAS system. They immediately went, "Oh, you can't have that." And I'm like, well, it's not really breaking the rules, mate. Well, it's called a resolution system. Use it, mate. Try and
Well, I
build your
mean,
own.
DAS was a very much a grey area, and I think because
Yeah.
of the lack of understanding of DAS, and the lack of time available to investigate it, given that we were expecting to have these 2022 regulations now, because
Because
you know,
you
before
saw the
COVID.
advantage and say like
Oh, of
Nürburgring, how
course.
cold it was, and you saw when that safety restart stuff. Verstappen was struggling, and Ricardo nearly overtook him. What
Yeah,
Hamilton was
yeah.
like, "Bye, I'll see you later."
Yeah.
Send
No,
you a
no, no.
postcard.
Yeah, but you're right. But of course, we weren't able to quantify that because Mercedes didn't provide us with the data to, you know, quantify what advantage they got from DAS. There certainly was one. There's so many different facets in Formula One over the years, so many different teams coming up with so many different innovations. And unfortunately, in a sport that rewards innovation to the highest degree, if you can really nail it, I mean, I could count so many eras where one particular piece of tech has defined it to a degree. I mean, I can go back to 2009 and talk about the double, triple diffusers that Braun and Toyota and Williams had before they were outlawed. But what tends to happen is instead of teams rising to the challenge, putting money towards these projects to try and develop their own systems, the first method of tackling this is usually to try and get it outlawed because it's the cheaper option. And unfortunately, there are cases when that can happen. I mean, look at the what was one of my favorite ones over the years, the F ducts. You remember them back in 2010, 2012? McLaren were the first team to bring the F duct, and then obviously other teams created their own versions.
Did it, but the problem is, what was great about McLaren, they used their knee. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It made it safe. But everyone else with their own system, but you could see they were like,
well, no, the reason it got outlawed was because the Spanish Grand Prix.
You saw Alonso.
Fernando Alonso was driving one-handed.
You saw Red Bull, they were driving one-handed, right? Because they were using their hand. They weren't using what McLaren were doing, which is with their knee. So the knee was safe, but unfortunately their hand wasn't. They were like, and I bet when that came along, they're like, oh, that's not safe, we're banning it. And for McLaren, I'm like, you idiots, use your knee, right? Your knee, right?
Well,
God.
I mean, you could say that, but I mean, you and I both know that Formula One cars, they're so different. You can't apply one piece of tech and put it on another one and expect it to work. Like they all filter in so many different ways. That's why with DAS,
I think you got to put the activate button where your knee was. I mean,
well, you say that, but it depends on where the airflow sort of goes through the car. Maybe Ferrari felt that was because McLaren obviously had the funnel at the front of their car, whereas Ferrari obviously just filters through the back. But you know, with DAS, unless you had the schematics and the designs, because it's all working inside the car, and of course the teams can't see the inside of the car because of all the bodywork. That's
the thing. And you can't copy anything inside the car. That's why
absolutely
Racing Point was punished last season, because yes, they copied the car, and on the outside you can do that. Anything that's outside and you can take a picture of, you can copy that. That's not a problem. Right? If you're copying brake ducts, you must have been getting information from Mercedes, whether you bought it or whatever it's agreed. You've got information inside there about the brake ducts. You can't do that.
I mean, that was a weird one because, I mean, I could go into the long history of that, but there's not enough time for that. But long story short is that effectively Racing Point had purchased listed parts from Mercedes in 2020 for those rear brake ducts, as they claimed, but when they were legal, but then it became an illegal part to have a listed part on the next year's car. So you ended up in a situation where, because they didn't use it on the actual car they were using in 2019, by the time they got around to using it in 2020 or designed their own version of it for whatever reason, it became illegal. So it was kind of like a faux pas, really, and the FIA got confused. It all got a bit very confusing, and that's why I think they got punished ultimately. When you could argue perhaps they should have
claimed it was just because they were looking inside the car.
Absolutely, yeah. But no, because they purchased the parts, didn't they, from Mercedes? It was a listed part. That's why they looked at that in particular, because it was a part you could see.
Because they bought information inside of Mercedes to copy
they had done, but the whole point of it was because it was a listed part, it was illegal. Like you could buy listed parts there's a list, obviously, you know, pardon the pun, but there's a list of parts you can actually purchase from your supplier teams, and there's nothing stopping Racing Point from designing a car using a lot of parts like that. I mean, that was around the whole controversy with the pink Mercedes, if you like. But the issue at hand is because they didn't use that part when they bought it when it was legal, they didn't use it until the year afterwards where it became illegal. So that by that logic, the FI said, well, you didn't use that part last year, so you got no evidence to show that you should have used it this year. But then Racing Point said, well, we bought it last year, we took it apart, took the designs, and then made another version of it.
And in the
but
end,
we can't
McLaren
forget.
still finished third.
Well, yeah, but that ultimately was why, really, because they can't forget what they've learned. But I think that's why they didn't get punished worse, because disqualification or build a brand new car, those sorts of levels, you could put punishments like that. I think that's why the FIA gave them the punishment that they did, because it wasn't massively harsh, but there was some level of wrongdoing. It depends on what side you're on, but it just shows how crazy these innovations can be and what teams will do.
Before we wrap up, just a couple of some new rules. So new classifications have been designed for each part. So there's which parts are being standardized in 2022. So listed parts, like I said before, with the impacts structure, most of the parts that will probably fly off the car are for that they will be sort of in a sort of rubber membrane to help with safety. So, but yeah, in terms of which is standardized for 2022, listed parts, which includes the parts a team must design itself. For example, most of the aero parts. Standard parts are parts everyone must use, which now includes wheel rims and pit stop equipment. Transferable parts are parts that may be bought and sold between teams, for example, gearboxes and clutch mechanisms. This means teams like Haas can continue to buy a range of parts from Ferrari as it currently does, and AlphaTauri can use for Red Bull and Racing Point uses for Mercedes. Right? There are two new classifications: prescribed and open source parts. Prescribed parts are everything must be designed to the letter. These include parts of the wheel aerodynamics, the wheel hubs, and the front floor T-tray. Open source parts are parts that may be designed by a collective and can be made available for all. That includes the DRS mechanism, brakes, and the steering wheels. Some parts may change in classification, for example, steering wheels, and to become standard parts for 2023, which are the standardized tire blankets while the standardized tire blankets will be banned from 2024 onwards. So the prescribed nature of wheel hubs do not extend to the brake ducts, which remain as a listed part, but the design is a lot more tightly regulated. This should help ensure F1 teams to not go through a repeat of Racing Point duct, breakpoint ducts saga during the 2020 season, as we just explained. And like I said, with this, the common problem of F1 is the amount of on-track debris, which often occurs, interrupts races, or causes damage to if it's not disposed of swiftly. One of the key new features of 2022 is that select parts will be covered in a rubber membrane to stop them shattering so easily. This means that on-track debris should be reduced, while intention is to stop front wings from detaching from the cars. Some of the components at the rear of the car will also be tethered to keep them attached in an event of an accident. Nose will be longer to improve the energy absorption, while the side impact structures are also strengthened. The cockpits are made larger to help taller drivers. The caveat that is the weight will increase from the current mass from 752 kilos to 775. Each team will be submit its CAD development of their cars, and the FIA monitor with whether it fits in with the defined reference space and volumes. During scrutineering, the cars must be scanned, measured against the CAD files, meaning that any rules transgressions can be immediately detected at a glance. It should be easy to determine whether the car is legal or not. So, what do you say to that?
Well, there's a lot going on there, isn't it?
No, there's a lot.
Yeah, as I said, we've gone around this so much already in this live stream. And I think ultimately, as we said already, the aim is to make sure that the pack stays as condensed as possible. No one tries to steal a march or no one finds any loopholes. We want close racing. We want competitive racing. And ultimately, more than anything else, Stephen, F1 is looking to the future. F1 needs to try and be an attractive product to new investment, to new teams. I mean, I've mentioned Pantera. Anyone who's heard the story about this team trying to get into Formula One, there's a $200 million buy-in. Of course, you have to pay each team $20 million to get into the sport. Before you can, and obviously you don't earn any sort of major revenue for the first season other than prize money, etc. So it needs to become more attractive to newer manufacturers, to companies like Porsche or Audi or Volkswagen. They've all talked about trying to get into the sport, but they feel priced out of it. Now these new regulations are in. Now it's more competitive. Now that the budget caps are in place, it should be cheaper to manufacture. You may start to see more teams in the sport, because ultimately right now, 10 teams is not enough. And there's always been the threat of losing teams like Haas, for example. And I've got a funny feeling that Gene Haas is going to sell up, and despite Haas continuing, and they're going to be bought out. Possibly the Mazepins might be involved in this somehow, but with a new backer, possibly Rich Energy. William Story has been talking about the owner of Rich Energy. He's been talking about getting back into Formula One. And for me, I just feel that there's only one team on the grid that he's going to come back into Formula One with. And obviously that's going to have to involve Gene Haas probably selling up as well. The stories just seem to coincide with each other to a point where I'm expecting to see a Rich Energy Formula One team as part of a major rebrand for the Haas outfit. So definitely keep an eye on that. But of course, this will create options for newer teams to come into the sport with more standard parts. It's going to be much cheaper to run this sport, and ultimately that has been the big drawback in Formula One, where it's just cost so much. So many teams have come in, poured out. I could go through a list of them, but ultimately that's what we want. We want more teams in the sport, more competitiveness, and just a better show for the fans. I don't think we're asking for much here as fans of any sport, let alone Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, we can't ask for any more. I think it would definitely be a great event. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I was quite hesitant at first looking at the styles, because there's always like I'm always white for anything that means progression, but when you see new designs, I'm sort of querying first, like, does it really want to look at? It looks more like a do I want like the wheel covers or anything? I see that in Formula E, and yeah, do I want that? But looking at it and breaking it down, if it's safer, if it's more efficient, obviously I don't want them completely stopped in terms of progression. Say if someone does stall the march at the start, I don't want them completely stopped in terms of developing the car. So yeah, if it means then closer racing, so it's like in general, then you can't ask anymore as a fan. So
yeah. I mean, I was just looking at Anthony's comment, actually. I mean, Anthony, in terms of your comment, we did talk about this at the beginning of the live stream. So, of course, if you missed that, definitely go back. But just to sum it all up, it's 40 years ago since they banned ground effect, and the technology has been so much more advanced as it was compared to then. But one thing I can say is F1's going to manage this by removing the side skirts that we remember from the old ground effect days, replacing it with fins underneath the car to funnel this air more efficiently. It should make it much more safer to use ground effect, and I'm really excited by how it's going to work. The cars look fantastic from the design concept. Not everything is great. Like you said, Stephen, I'd prefer not to have the wheel covers. I think we've gone too Tron-like with that. But it's all for an aero benefit as well, to try and recoup that.
If the fans say that, though, they'll listen. But anyway,
to a degree, but we'll see.
Yeah. Anyway, we're gonna have to wrap it up there because I'm really pushed for time. I'm trying to get a reaction to this protest at the same time.
Oh God, yeah, got to check social media for that.
Same time. Yeah, but I'll be checking social media. I'll be checking it for this story.
Have I got time to do one quick plug, if that's all right?
Go on, go and do it.
Just one quick plug, guys. For those of you interested, tomorrow on the DNF1 channel, we are going to be releasing a very special podcast, our retro series now that we abandoned briefly, but we brought it back. It's going to be the Senna Prost episode where we talk about the 1989 rivalry, Japan 1989. We recorded this one a little while ago. It's been a lot of work on this one, Stephen, but I guarantee it's going to be a really good one. So if you haven't already checked out our channel, definitely check it out. It's going to be live tomorrow.
If you're doing a Schumacher one, you're getting me involved in that one. So
definitely, mate. Definitely. Well, you're going to be on. You're going to be on our. You're going to be on our Portimao preview next week, aren't you? So yeah. Definitely have you on there. But yeah, guys, check that out. Senna versus Prost, Japan 1989. I guarantee you're going to enjoy it on the DNF1 Retro podcast. So definitely check out the DNF1 channel.
Find the link to his channel in the description below. Right, so go and subscribe and do that now. And
thank you.
As I said, you'll be back. We'll be back hopefully next week. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another show. But until then, everyone stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye.